Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This is the last lecture in the series of origins of the non-Western biblical parameter standpoint. This is Origins of Dinosaurs, and this is lecture number one out of 6. What we started this lecture series with from the very beginning was a quote by Stephen Jay Gould, and what I had found in the quote was an answer to a question or that I had because I was interested in the origins debate, but I was not really interested in the debate part. I wasn't interested in usually how the two, if there was a debate, and how the two usually or could degenerate down into a personal attack. And so I was wondering, how can I understand what's going on between basically 5 different models of origins? And how can I discern? What are the tools that I can have to be able to discern between the different models, and what distinguishes the different models? Well, this is what I had found in the quote of Stephen Jay Gould, who himself being a scientist, a biologist, he recognized, he said, first, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. So in other words, facts just don't come to us. They aren't a package deal. They aren't just something that we just look at and there it is, and we just report what it is. What he says, first, facts do not come to us as objective items, as an object. Just as a plain object, they don't come to us. There is a separation between us and the facts and the objective item. We cannot get directly to the facts or to those objective items. Why? Well, he says, because theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. Well, this started making sense to me because of us living cross-culturally for 25 years in South America and understanding how culture really influences the perspective of the person and how they see things. And so Stephen Jay Gould's was in the way we perceive them. And perception really is a dynamic process that is influenced by these factors of which Stephen Jay Gould represents, or what he mentions as being theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. And what those factors do is, in the interpretation process, I never looked at it as an interpretation process really before. I understood theology in that there's hermeneutics, which is the science of interpretation. And I understand how different perspectives and different rules affect the interpretation in theology, but I had never really thought about that the same thing is happening in whatever other field. There is a hermeneutic going on. There is a science of interpretation, and there are rules involved. And this is where we come up with the world with a question mark, and we all have questions about different aspects of the world, and none of us have enough time to become experts in knowledge and knowing all those different fields. So what we do is we invite an expert in that has studied that particular area, and then that expert studies the data, that part of the world that we're interested in knowing about. They study it through those lenses, and it's those lenses then that represent the 4 factors of theory, habit, and prejudice and culture that influence, and that's why the lines that influence the interpretation and the interpretation process. And so now, after understanding how these influences are in our everyday life and how we perceive things, because there's things going on every day that we look at the news, we look at different things and read, and we observe going down the road. Is that there's a lot of different perceptions of what's going on, and it's because of those glasses that we all have and that we cannot function without. It's not like as if we'll take off all your biases and just look at it unbiasedly, and it's kind of like we can't, because we have to have a base of how to function. It's kind of like telling your computer that, don't use your operating system because that's a prejudice. Just operate. And it's kind of like it don't work that way. The computer has an operating system, and it has to boot up according to that system and those rules. And we are very similar in our thinking processes, in that we take with us the theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. That's our boot system, and all those elements that go into it to make us think, or allow us to think, and to be able to process the outside material. And then in that, which this is a thing to take note, is that all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. So in other words, if we choose there's so much out there, stimulus, that we choose what we're going to process and how we're going to perceive it. And so that is what goes into the interpretation process. And so that, I believe, is what has now equipped me to better understand what is going on in the origins debate, and that it's really a difference between theory, habit, prejudice, and culture of different scientists, different philosophers, different theologians, and the rest of us, in that we have a perspective, and we cannot see things without a point of view of seeing them. That brings us to just what we have seen before, is the house and how the house relates, how Stephen Jay Gould's culture, prejudice, theory, and habit relate to the house structure. And the house structure is basically a diagram of philosophy and of Weltbild, or the Welt concept, which is the Welt build, which would be correspond to the culture down below, and then the Weltanschauung, which is the worldview. So Weltbild is the world picture. The world picture is formed by the culture. Then we go into the prejudice part, which is the Weltbild and how we then look out at the world. So we have a world picture, then we have a world view. We view the world through the picture of our reliable source of knowledge, through our culture, reliable source of knowledge, and our basic beliefs, and then our methods. So basically, this house diagrams is a flow chart of how philosophy operates through epistemology, or metaphysics, epistemology, and then up through axiology on the top. So what we have is Stephen Jay Gould's culture, and identifying that as the Weltbild, the bottom, the subconscious influencing factors that give us a foundation, or the ground to build on, and then our source of knowledge. And that's what we're going to be going over now, is, okay, the non-Western. We're building this house of thought on a non-Western cultural tendency. And why is that? Well, because we're going into biblical parameters. We've been using biblical parameters. And there's a lot of confusion can be generated when we use biblical parameters from a Western perspective. And because the biblical parameters were actually written for and from a non-Western perspective. And so we may, in our hermeneutics, be interpreting from our standpoint, which is not the same as the standpoint of those that read it and wrote it. So what we're looking at is, what are some of the cultural tendencies that might be important? Now, going back to the first part of this series on culture, we listed 21 differences culturally between myself, a Westerner, and my students, non-Westerners, and how that difference really impeded the educational process and the communication process. And without taking those into consideration, it really put up bars, and it separated almost the communication process. So what are some of the tendencies that are important now in this series? Well, 4 of the important ones that I've listed are, first one is the universal domains, how we divide things up. In the non-Western cultural tendency, they divide things up by a powerful creator and then everything else created. And there's fluidity. There's passage between the creator and that which was created. They aren't separate worlds. Where we, as Westerners, we kind of I grew up with the universal domains of the natural world and the supernatural. And so people would ask, do you believe in the supernatural? And it's kind of like, well, yeah, I did. But now I'm questioning things like, okay, if you believe in a created world and that God inhabits that created world, then what's natural about that world? It's physical, but it's not natural, as separated from supernatural. So in this way of thinking, the creator and the created are not two separate domains. They occupy the same domain. So you can't separate the spirit world from the physical world, from the material world, which we do as a Western thinkers. We separate them, and then once we separate them, then we can do away with one or the other, and we become materialists. Whereas in the Western, non-Western way of thinking, they aren't materialists. They would be spiritualists more, because they might do away with the material world first before the spiritual world. So there is a lot of interaction between the creator and the created. Okay, number 2, the universal operating system. Because it's a creator created and there's no division between the creator and the created, meaning the system is open, open to influences that are outside of the created powers. Okay, so that means the creator is within the system, and the creator, being omnipotent, can influence his creation and can change how he upholds it. He can uphold it differently. So in other words, the functioning of it, he upholds the functioning, Colossians says. And so it's kind of like, okay, but he doesn't have to uphold it in the same common way every time. It can be changed. And so in other words, that is not, in this system, is not an intervention. And it's not interference of natural laws, because there are no natural laws, if that meaning that is a realm that is separate and supernatural is not allowed in. There is not intervention. So they work from an open system. And an open system has very much spiritual influences over it, where they live in a spiritual world dominated by spirits and spiritual thoughts. And the physical world is there and it is real, but it is dominated by the spirit. And again, just for example, in Bolivia, when we would go to the Amazon, into the outlying region, rural areas, they were very much more spiritually attuned to nature. And so if they were going to go fishing or hunting, they would ask for permission from the spirit of the river or from the spirit of the forest. If they were going to chop down trees, it would be permission of the spirit of that forest if they could chop the tree down. So they are very in touch with the spiritual side of the world, where us Westerners, I think we are very detached, and we're very, very separate from that, and we find it very odd. But anyway, it was a very, very good learning lesson. Number 3 is because they believe in a spiritual world, and they know that they don't have powers as the spirit world does, even though a lot of them might seek those powers, they believe in an external authority. They are external authority driven. The locus of authority, the center of authority, is external to them. And so they do not feel responsible, nor can they take the responsibility to act on their own, to make decisions, to create, to build, to do things. That is not within their realm, mostly with an outside authority. They will do to the jot and the tittle of what the external authority asks of them, but for them to go and generate on their own, very difficult. And this is where I found in the educational field, in that if we're asking them as constructivists to construct their own knowledge, it's kind of like they don't have the authority to do that. That's very much against, that's a very Western type of concept that is does not go with their external authority belief tendencies. So that is external authority, which is very important to understand. Then another important thing to understand is time. And this is what can be frustrating for both sides of it, is that we have different concepts of time. And we would go on activities and we would say we're going to meet at school at 8 o'clock. And then my students would start passing word around is that that's 8 o'clock in punto. That's gringo time, okay? Why? Well, because they have often a different concept of time, in that they are not chronos centered. They are what's called kairos centered. Kairos has to do with quality, has to do with event, has to do with the color, has to do with the quality of what goes on in time. It is not concerned about the passing of time, the clicking, the ticking. It's about the event. Whereas the Western culture is very much about chronos. It's chronology. It's about ticking. It's about sense, saving seconds makes sense. We did our capitalistic endeavors are very time orientated, and saving time means saving money. They do not have that same concept of time. And so in other words, what we're getting into is the concept or the topic of the dinosaurs. And what would be of more interest, or from this point of view, is they don't really care about chronos. Don't tell me dinosaurs lived 244 million years ago, extinguished 66 million years ago, and then just give them numbers. They want to know, where did these animals come from? Where did they go? What were they like? And what happened to them? The events. They're event orientated. They're the quality of the event, not specifically numbers. So numbers don't really mean that much. So we're going to be looking at the mystery of the dinosaurs from an event-centered point of view that's open system, which means they're creationists, the creator. So these animals then were created. To them, that is very possible. For us, Westerners, that's more difficult to understand, because in our thoughts, time separates the Bible record from the dinosaurs. And in their mind, that's not one of the qualifiers. That's not a thing that would disqualify, because the Creator created. And it's about an event of quality. It's not an event about how long ago it was or how long that lasted. So those are the tendencies, cultural tendencies, that influence the understanding and the thinking processes about the topics that we're getting into. Okay, now what would be the reliable source of knowledge? In the house diagram, we must choose a reliable source of knowledge. And we choose that based on our preferences, because we don't yet have a criteria to select a reliable source of knowledge. So basically, it's a prejudice. What is our prejudice as a reliable source? What are the sources? These are the four sources recognized philosophically, at least by the different universities in the United States. One, intuitive knowledge. That means my source of knowledge comes from within me. And what does that mean? Well, it's just I feel it. I know it. That is right. I can't explain it. I can't detail it. I can't. Why is it? I just know it's right. Okay, so it's an intuition. That is the source. Is that my source of knowledge? Not particularly. Okay, number two, authoritarian knowledge. Authoritarian knowledge means knowledge from outside. Outside, it could be a book, it could be a document, it could be a person, could be an object, whatever is that authority. Okay, that includes revealed, revelation, which is biblical parameters, because that is the authority, it has been revealed. So authoritarian knowledge is what would be chosen for a non-Western biblical parameter. It's the biblical part that is the parameter. That is the chosen source of knowledge. Okay, the third one, logical knowledge. Logical knowledge is knowledge, of course, that is human-based. And instead of intuitive down here, it's reason-based up here. And so it's just a different location of how to get to knowledge. It's through theorems, it's through equations, it's through mathematics, it's through reasoning processes, logic. And so that is another source. Is that a non-Western source of knowledge? Not really. That is not their strong point. That is not what they care about. Number 4, empirical knowledge. They are based on empirical knowledge because their world is very visual, concrete based. But again, they're very spiritually based first. So it is authoritarian knowledge. Now, in the U.S. Culture, where we tend to be less spiritually based, we're more physically based, that is where we would pick empirical knowledge and logical knowledge, the two below that. But we're talking non-Western. And Hebrew original culture would be authoritarian knowledge. Okay, now we're to the building of the foundation of the house. And so we have those symbols again. Those symbols represent in the building plans the grounded circuit. So the grounded circuit of this house is the Weltbild, is the culture. It's the subconscious forces of the environment, of our surrounding, of our upbringing that make us and color us of who we are. So this is the non-Western, the ground zero is the non-Western cultural tendency. That is the tendency for this house. And we have to incorporate that tendency, because to understand that each culture has a tendency, and when we go to another culture, you see it. They're different. They think different. They do things different. And that's what we have to understand. We have to take this with us. And in much of our Western way of thinking, that factor doesn't enter in at all. We just go with logic and with empiricism, and it's kind of like, boop, that it's all processed and everybody sees things the same way and thinks things the same way. And it's kind of like, no, they don't. So we have to factor in the Western cultural tendencies and what they are. Then based on those Western cultural tendencies, then we choose our reliable source of knowledge. Out of the 4 sources of knowledge, what do we choose? Well, this one is choosing one, external authority. Okay, it's external. It's biblical. Okay, and it's revealed. So that's where we're at. External, biblical, revealed knowledge, which means to have revealed knowledge, it's an open system. Have to have an open system to have revealed knowledge. If you have a closed system, like there's many different models, scientific models, that are based on a totally closed system, some based on a semi-closed system, and some based on an oscillating system of open, closed, open, closed. So that basically is the difference between a lot of the different scientific models. Is it an open system or a closed system, or does it oscillate somewhere in between? So this one is open system. So here we are, we're back to the house, and the full house has 14 different factors that influence within the thinking process. And what we're factoring in is the bottom level, the zero is not on there, but ground zero, which is the culture influence. Number 1 is the chosen source of reliable knowledge. Then out of the reliable knowledge, we get our basic belief system. And then out of the basic belief system, we make develop a system of thought, which is our philosophical base, our philosophy, and also our worldview. How are we going to view the world, which is through theory. Theory corresponds to worldview, because theory is view, how to view things, and you view things through these rules, these methods. So then we go up, and then we have a system of how applied system is equal to the world model, which is the Welt model. How do we model out our beliefs in the actual world, whether it be in science or politics or economics? It is our model. So we model it out, and then based on our model, it produces our values and ethics. So that is the flow of the house. And what we're working on is the scientific model, and we're getting up to there to understand how to interpret the physical world. And so that's what we're working on in this series, is that we're looking at the physical world. We're looking at the origin of dinosaurs from the perspective of a house of a non-Western cultural tendency that has chosen its reliable source as external authority, revealed biblical parameter. Again, thank you for joining me. This is number 1 of 6, but this is our last one. So we're going into the home stretch. And again, if you'd like to contact us, you can find us at the doubleroadrover.com or at thn.academia@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening.